My dad gave the family business that I had built to my deadbeat brother, and it went about as well as you'd expect. After 12 years, I transformed my dad's deadbeat startup into an industry leader. I thought I'd finally get some sort of acknowledgement to my existence, or at least put a stop to the emotional neglect. Then came the dinner announcement that changed everything. I'll never forget the smug look on my dad's face as he casually dropped the bomb at our celebratory dinner. Trevor will be taking over now, he announced, and instead of pointing and laughing at him, I forced a smile and raised my glass, while inside I was screaming. 12 years of my life's work dismissed in 7 casual words. My Aunt Patricia clapped enthusiastically. My cousin James nodded approvingly. A toast, I managed, my voice betraying nothing of the hurricane brewing inside me. To new beginnings. Let me backtrack. My father founded Mitchell Logistics when I was just a kid. In those early days, it was barely staying afloat. Missed mortgage payments, canceled family trips, and constant stress were my childhood memories. I remember finding my mother crying at the kitchen table one night, bills spread out in front of her like a morbid puzzle. I was only 10, but I knew something was terribly wrong. It's just business, sweetheart, she'd said, quickly wiping her tears. Your father will figure it out, but he didn't, ever. For years, we lived on the edge of financial ruin. I started noticing the patterns early, how dad would make impulsive decisions, trust the wrong people, and refuse to modernize. Even as a teenager, I could see the fundamental flaws in his business model. When I finished my MBA at 25, I begged him to let me join the company. He reluctantly agreed, probably assuming I'd fail. I still remember his dismissive tone when he showed me to a tiny windowless office on my first day. Don't expect any special treatment, you hear? And instead of special treatment, I worked longer hours than anyone else. I started by simply observing, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. I spent nights in the warehouse, identifying inefficiencies in our inventory management. I took clients to dinner on my own dime, building relationships dad had neglected. I revolutionized everything. I modernized our outdated systems, secured contracts with Fortune 500 companies, expanded operations coast to coast, and implemented cutting-edge tech solutions that our competitors couldn't match. What was once a failing regional shipper became a $75 million national powerhouse, all because of my blood, sweat, and tears. There were pivotal moments along the way, like the time I convinced Axion Technologies, a rising tech giant, to switch from their established logistics partner to us. Dad had scoffed when I proposed targeting them. Don't waste your time. But I'd spent months researching their pain points, developing a customized solution, and building a relationship with their procurement director. When I finally landed the contract, worth $12 million annually, Dad barely acknowledged the achievement. Lucky break, he'd muttered. Then there was the West Coast expansion that Dad had resisted for years, claiming the market was too competitive. I put together a comprehensive business case, secured financing, and launched our Los Angeles operations against his wishes. Within 18 months, our California division was outperforming our original headquarters. The company grew exponentially under my leadership. Employees who'd been ready to jump ship found new motivation. Our industry reputation soared. Even our competitors grudgingly acknowledged Mitchell Logistics as the new standard bearer. Through it all, I kept waiting for Dad to recognize what I'd accomplished, to finally say, "You were right, Sophie. You saved this company." That recognition never came. And yet there we were at dinner, surrounded by relatives and business associates, as Dad handed my company to Trevor, who had spent the last decade bouncing between failed startups and finding himself, while I was working 80-hour weeks. The table erupted in congratulations for Trevor, who feigned humility with downcast eyes. I knew better. My brother had never cared about logistics or operations. He cared about status and power. He wanted the title without any of the work. To Trevor, I said, lifting my glass while keeping my voice steady. The others joined, oblivious to the hurricane brewing inside me, and what happened next went better than I could have ever imagined. Mom caught my eye from across the table. Unlike Dad, she'd witnessed my dedication firsthand, but as always, she wouldn't intervene. Her slight frown and apologetic glance told me everything I needed to know. She disagreed with Dad's decision but wouldn't challenge it publicly. Trevor met my gaze with a barely concealed smirk. That's when I realized this wasn't just Dad's traditional son inherits the business mentality. My brother had orchestrated this, positioning himself as the prodigal son who'd finally found his calling. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment alone. The marble countertop felt cool against my palms as I leaned forward, staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me wasn't the eager-to-please daughter who joined the company 12 years ago. She was harder now, smarter, and absolutely done with being overlooked. You've earned this, I whispered to myself, and you're not going to let them take it away. When I returned to the table, the conversation had shifted to Trevor's vision for the company's future. He was talking about strategic pivots and market disruption, buzzwords he'd clearly memorized but didn't understand. I think we need to consider more aggressive acquisition strategies, he was saying. Maybe look at some of our competitors in the Midwest. I nearly choked on my wine. We'd specifically avoided acquisitions because our organic growth model was working perfectly. Trevor had no idea what he was talking about. Dad was nodding enthusiastically. Trevor's got some bold ideas. Fresh perspective. I couldn't help myself. Interesting approach, I interjected smoothly. Though our current market penetration strategy has yielded 27% year-over-year growth, what specific advantages do you see in shifting to acquisitions, Trevor? His smile faltered. Well, it's about scale and market share. We've doubled our market share in the last 3 years without a single acquisition, I pointed out. Our return on capital is industry-leading because we haven't taken on the debt that typically comes with aggressive acquisition strategies. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Dad cleared his throat. Sophie, this isn't a strategy session. We're celebrating tonight. Of course, I replied with a practiced smile, just curious about the new direction. What neither of them realized was that while Dad was playing figurehead and Trevor was playing heir apparent, I'd been quietly fortifying my position within the company structure. Over dessert, my Uncle Frank, Dad's brother and a minor shareholder, pulled me aside. "This can't have been easy for you," he said quietly, genuine concern in his eyes. Frank had always been the more perceptive of the Mitchell brothers. "It's fine," I lied. "Trevor will need guidance. Frank studied my face. You know, your father wasn't always the best at recognizing talent, even in his own family. When we were kids, he never noticed when I was better at something than him. I appreciated the validation, subtle as it was. History repeats itself, I guess. Sometimes, Frank nodded, and sometimes someone comes along who changes the pattern. His words stayed with me as we said our goodbyes. Trevor was already planning a celebration after party with his friends. Dad was basking in congratulations from his golf buddies. Mom hugged me tightly. He means well, she whispered in my ear. No, he doesn't, I replied softly, but that's okay. I don't need him to. That night, I didn't sleep. By 3 a.m., I was reviewing every contract, shareholding agreement, and legal document I'd meticulously archived over the years. I pulled up the executive shareholding agreement from my private safe, the document Dad had signed without thoroughly reading when we needed emergency capital during the West Coast expansion. I traced my finger along his signature, remembering how dismissive he'd been about the legal mumbo-jumbo, as he called it. Just handle it, Sophie, he'd said impatiently. I trust you know what you're doing. Oh, I did. I certainly did. By dawn, I had my strategy mapped out. I wasn't just fighting for my position. I was fighting for the company I'd built from the ashes of Dad's failures. The company that now employed over 200 people who depended on sound leadership. The company that clients trusted because of the systems and relationships I'd established. The next morning, I arrived at Mitchell Logistics headquarters at my usual 8:45. The atmosphere was different. Hushed whispers, averted gazes, uncertain smiles. News travels fast in family businesses. Kelly, my assistant for the past 6 years, met me at the elevator with a coffee and a pained expression. I heard about last night, she said quietly. I'm so sorry. Don't be, I replied, taking the coffee. Nothing's changing. She looked confused. But Mr. Mitchell announced, trust me, Kelly. Continue as normal. I walked confidently to my office and prepared for the confrontation I knew was coming. At precisely 9 o'clock, there was a sharp knock at my door. Dad strode in like he owned the place. Ironic, as you'll soon see. With Trevor trailing behind in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most of our employees make in a month. Sophie, Dad began authoritatively, I assume you're aware of the transition happening today? Transition? I repeated calmly. Interesting choice of words. Trevor will be stepping in as CEO, he continued. We'll need you to handle the handover before you move on. I arched an eyebrow. Move on? Dad, I think there's been a misunderstanding. His expression hardened. This isn't up for debate. The decision has been made. I smiled then. Not my usual accommodating smile, but something sharper. Actually, it is up for debate. And more importantly, it's not your decision to make. Trevor scoffed. Don't make this difficult, Sophie. Difficult? I echoed. No. Difficult was saving this company when it was $1.2 million in debt. Difficult was working 80-hour weeks while you were island hopping in Greece. This? I gestured between us. This is just business. Without responding further, I picked up my remote and turned on the conference screen. A document appeared. Our executive shareholders agreement from 2016, signed by all three of us. Dad's face paled slightly. Do you even know what this document is? I asked Trevor. Some shareholders thing? He guessed lamely. Yes, a shareholders agreement that clearly states any executive leadership change requires approval from all majority shareholders. I paused for effect. And I currently hold 62% of company shares. The silence was deafening. I could practically hear the gears turning in Dad's head as he tried to remember how this had happened. That's impossible, Trevor sputtered, stepping closer to the screen. Actually, it's very possible, I replied. Remember the capital injection we needed for the West Coast expansion in 2018, Dad? You signed over 15% of your shares to me, and in 2020, during that supplier lawsuit, another 12% was transferred as collateral that you never reclaimed. Add that to my original 35%. Dad's jaw clenched tight. Trevor was panicking. You're bluffing, he accused. I slid another document across the desk, our most recent state filing. Feel free to verify. Trevor snatched the paper, his face draining of color as he read. Dad, she can't do this. But Dad remained silent because he knew I could. I had legally outmaneuvered him. You planned this all along, Dad finally said, his voice low with anger. You manipulated me. I met his gaze squarely. I protected the company. I protected my interests. If you define that as manipulation, so be it. But I never lied to you. You just never bothered to read what you were signing. Trevor threw the document back on my desk. This is a betrayal. After everything Dad's done for you, I laughed, the sound sharp and without humor. What exactly has he done for me, Trevor? Given me an opportunity. I earned that. A position in the company. I created my own role and proved my value 1,000 times over. Recognition? I shook my head. That never came. So please enlighten me about what I should be grateful for. I stood up. I'm not firing you, Trevor. I wouldn't want to force you to actually earn a living. You can report to me and learn the business you claim to care about, or I gestured toward the door. You're free to leave. Trevor looked frantically at Dad, but for once, our father had no solution, because this wasn't his company anymore. It was mine. The stunned silence in my office felt like a physical weight. Trevor clutched the legal document, knuckles white, while Dad stood rigid, calculating his next move. There wasn't one. So that's it? Trevor finally spat. You're just taking everything? I laughed without humor. Taking? I built this company from nothing. Every contract, every innovation, every dollar of growth came from my work while you were busy failing at your little ventures. I'm not taking anything. I'm keeping what I earned. You were allowed to build it, Trevor shot back. Dad gave you that chance when no one else would have. Is that what he told you? I asked. That he did me some great favor by letting me save his failing business? Interesting revision of history? Dad broke his silence. You're making a mistake, Sophie. Families should stick together. Do you really want to burn this bridge? I met his gaze directly. You burned that bridge when you made your decision without me. Business is bigger than one person, he argued. We can find a solution for everyone. I agree completely. That's why I'm offering you both options. I turned to Trevor. You can stay in an advisory role, with a generous salary but no executive authority. Or you can walk away. I'll buy your shares at market value so you can fund whatever new project catches your fancy. And what about Dad? Trevor demanded. Same options. stay as chairman emeritus, a figurehead role with no operational decision-making power, or sell his remaining shares and retire completely. Dad scoffed. You're acting like you hold all the cards. I do. The silence stretched until Dad shook his head. I never thought you'd do this. Not to your own family. His words stung, but I didn't flinch. He was the one who tried to push me aside after everything I'd done. Family? I repeated softly. When did that matter to you, Dad? Was it family consideration when you dismissed every idea I brought to the table until it succeeded despite your resistance? Was it family loyalty when you never once acknowledged that I saved this company? Or was it family first when you decided to hand over my life's work to Trevor without even a conversation with me? Dad had no answer. Your hypocrisy is showing, I continued. Family only seems to matter when it's convenient for you. Trevor stormed out first, slamming the door hard. I knew he'd go straight to our relatives, painting himself as the victim. I didn't care. I wasn't fighting for their approval anymore. Dad lingered. You've changed, he said quietly. No, Dad. I just finally stopped pretending. He moved toward the door, then paused. Your grandfather founded this company with nothing but a truck and a dream. He wanted it to be something that brought our family together, not tore it apart. Grandfather died when I was 3, I reminded him. But from what everyone tells me, he was a fair man who recognized hard work and rewarded loyalty. Maybe that's the family tradition you should have focused on preserving. After they left, I sat alone in my office. I should have felt victorious, but there was an ache beneath my triumph. Some small part of me had always craved Dad's recognition, had believed that if I worked hard enough, he'd finally see me as worthy. But he never really looked. Now he had no choice but to see me for what I truly was. Not his daughter, not a temporary caretaker, but the rightful leader of Mitchell Logistics. I spent the rest of the morning calling key executives one by one into my office. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, many of whom I'd personally hired or promoted. And I'd earned their respect through consistent results and fair leadership, not through family connections. I'm sure you've heard some conflicting information today, I said to each of them. Let me be clear. I remain CEO of Mitchell Logistics. The company structure and your reporting lines remain unchanged. Most responded with visible relief. A few seemed uncertain. One, Richard from sales, always Dad's golf buddy, asked directly, but Mr. Mitchell announced Trevor would be taking over. Mr. Mitchell was mistaken about his authority to make that decision. I replied calmly. The legal ownership of this company gives me final say on leadership appointments. By noon, I'd heard Trevor had cleaned out his desk and left the building. Dad had apparently retreated to his country club to process. I was focused on damage control. The battle wasn't over. By the next morning, I could feel the unease rippling through the company. Dad and Trevor were working the Whisper network, calling board members, senior executives, family friends, painting me as cold, ruthless, disloyal. James from the legal department stopped by my office, closing the door behind him. I thought you should know, he said in a low voice. Your father's been calling board members. He's trying to convene an emergency session to contest your control. On what grounds? I asked, unsurprised. He's claiming you manipulated him into signing over his shares without full disclosure. There's talk of potential legal action. I nodded. Thanks for the heads up, James. After he left, I pulled up our corporate bylaws. Dad could try to contest the share transfers, but the documentation was meticulous. Every signature was properly witnessed. Every agreement crystal clear in its language. I called an emergency executive meeting that afternoon. Let's not waste time, I said as I took my seat at the head of the table. I know there have been conversations happening behind closed doors. I let my gaze sweep the room, watching people shift uncomfortably. I pulled up our performance metrics on the screen. Facts. I built this company from a struggling regional business to a $75 million industry leader. Under my leadership, we've seen 300% revenue growth and expanded into 6 new markets. I turned to our CFO. Mark, is there any financial indicator suggesting this company is struggling under my leadership? After a moment's hesitation, he shook his head. Number. In fact, projections show another 20% growth next quarter. So let's be honest, I continued. My father and brother aren't upset because the company is failing. They're upset because they expected me to step aside for Trevor regardless of qualifications or results. I paused, letting that sink in. These were smart business people. They understood merit and results. Many of you have been with Mitchell Logistics longer than I have, I acknowledged. You remember where we were 12 years ago, constantly behind on vendor payments, losing clients to competitors, struggling to make payroll. Would anyone argue that we're not in a vastly better position today? No one spoke up. Then I dropped the bombshell. I also know some of you have been approached in the last 24 hours with incentives to push for my resignation. If anyone would like to disclose those conversations, now's your chance. After an uncomfortable silence, one executive cleared his throat. Your father called me. He said he's considering a formal appeal to the board. And did he offer anything in return for your support? A slow, reluctant nod. There it is, I said, standing. My father built this company, and I respect that. But I took it further than he ever could, and I won't let him manipulate it from the outside. I let my voice drop lower. If he wants a fight, he'll get one. If anyone here believes my father and brother deserve control, make your move now. Silence. No one moved. Good. I straightened my shoulders. Then let's get back to work. We have a company to run. As they filed out, my head of HR lingered. The employees are confused, she said. They need to hear directly from you. She was right. I scheduled a company-wide address for the following morning. That night, I made my own call to a journalist I knew at the Wall Street Journal. By morning, every major business publication had the same headline. Power shift at Mitchell Logistics. Sophie Mitchell outmaneuvers family in boardroom battle. The article painted me as a business wunderkind who had transformed a failing company into an industry leader, only to face a patriarchal coup attempt. It mentioned my MBA, my innovations, the growth statistics under my leadership. It also subtly highlighted how Trevor had explored various career options while I was building the Mitchell empire. Dad's counterattack came by noon, a press release about my character and leadership style. The business media picked it up immediately. Was Sophie Mitchell too aggressive? Would her lack of cooperation hurt the company? They talked as if I wasn't already planning my next move. I called an old college friend in investigative journalism and sent over documents showing questionable business practices at Mitchell Logistics under my father's leadership, practices I'd spent years quietly correcting. Tax inconsistencies, regulatory compliance issues, vendor payment manipulations that had bordered on fraud. I hadn't wanted to expose these problems. They were family laundry I'd preferred to keep private, but Dad had forced my hand. The story broke within 24 hours. Behind Mitchell Logistics' success, how Sophie Mitchell saved company from financial mismanagement. The narrative shifted instantly. The board stopped questioning me. The investors regained confidence, and my father had nowhere to hide. 2 days later, he finally called. "Sophie," he said tightly, "we need to talk, do we?" After a pause, "You didn't have to do that." I laughed. "Neither did you. This company was supposed to be a legacy for both of you. If you wanted me to protect the legacy," I replied quietly, "you should have trusted me with it. Instead, you tried to take it from me." Another long silence. "What happens now?" "Now I make sure no one can ever touch my company again." Dad agreed to retire completely. We negotiated a generous package for him. Trevor took his buyout and disappeared to start some tech venture in Austin. The war was over. I won, but victory felt hollow. I found myself working even longer hours, pushing harder, growing faster, as if still trying to prove something to someone who wasn't even there anymore. A month later, Mitchell Logistics looked completely different. Board members who sided with my father, gone. Executives who questioned my leadership, replaced. The company had always thrived under my guidance, but now it was truly mine. I introduced initiatives Dad had always rejected, modernized systems he'd deemed unnecessary, expanded into markets he'd feared. Within 6 months, profits soared. Within a year, we crossed the $100 million mark. At the company holiday party that December, I looked around at the hundreds of employees celebrating our best year ever. These were my people now, loyal to me, not to the Mitchell name or the old guard. As I gave my speech thanking them for their hard work, I finally felt the satisfaction I'd been missing. This wasn't about proving my father wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. On Christmas Day, I drove to my parents' house for the first time since the takeover. Mom answered the door, her surprise evident. "Sophie, I didn't think. I brought pie," I said simply, holding up the dessert. Dad was in his study, pretending to read. He looked up when I entered, his expression unreadable. "Merry Christmas," I said. He nodded. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought it was time." We made stiff small talk through dinner. After dessert, Dad excused himself to his study again. I followed him. "Running away?" I asked from the doorway. He sighed heavily. "What do you want from me, Sophie? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I don't want an apology. I want you to understand why I did what I did. Because you always needed to be in control," he said dismissively. I shook my head. "Because I earned it. Because I deserved it. Because the company deserved better than a leader who got the job through nepotism." "Trevor could have learned," he argued. "In 12 years, he never once showed interest in learning," I countered. "He wanted the title, not the responsibility." Dad stared out the window at the snow-covered lawn. "I just wanted what was best for the company." "No," I said softly. "You wanted what was traditional. The son inherits the business. That was never about what was best for Mitchell Logistics." A year after the coup, I invited him to a formal dinner meeting, our first real conversation since his retirement. He looked different, quieter, less commanding. "I read about your Asia-Pacific expansion," he said over his scotch. "Smart move." "I know," I replied simply. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There was no tension anymore, just the simple truth. He had tried to push me aside, and I had proven him wrong. "The Singapore office is already exceeding projections," I added. "Turns out there was a huge untapped market there." "I was always conservative about international expansion," he admitted. "Too many variables. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the biggest rewards." He nodded slowly. "Your instincts were always better than mine. I just couldn't see it." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I'd ever received from him. He lifted his glass. "To Mitchell Logistics." When I clinked my glass against his, I felt neither anger nor resentment, only peace. I had already won, and I no longer needed his approval to know it. Trevor reached out a few months later. His Austin venture had failed. Something about an app for luxury pet services. He wanted to come back to Mitchell Logistics. "There's always a place for family," I told him. "But you'll start where everyone else does, at the bottom. No shortcuts this time." Surprisingly, he accepted. He's working in our sales department now, learning the business the way I should have been allowed to, through hard work and merit-based advancement. Today, sitting in my corner office overlooking the city where I built my empire, I reflect on what this journey taught me. Family can be your greatest adversary. Loyalty must be earned, not expected. Power is never given, it's taken. And sometimes the best validation comes not from seeking approval, but from building something so undeniable that no one can ignore your worth. I have no regrets. Mitchell Logistics is mine now, and I intend to make sure no one ever forgets it.